Good morning and welcome to Waking Wellness. We have a quick morning meditations question. I saw a film and I've thought of this before, but this one really had me relook at it. The previous film was called Mandala Effect, and it talks about the Mandala Effect. But this movie was called The Astral Woods, and it went back into the mandala effect with a few different examples that of course make you go like, oh my gosh, like the Shazam and Kazam and Sinbad actually starring in it, or us thinking so, and Shaquille O'Neal actually being the one to star in it. And so when the movie brought it up, it hit me so potently because I had wanted to see something else like the mandala effect, and something that just gave that feeling again. But in listening to their examples and their explanation, it's funny because I was reading a text, Esoteric Psychology, which went a bit into this. Actually, it went clearly into it, and they explain it a bit as the mandala effect itself is. And so the morning meditation is actually a question about whether or not do we believe that the mandala effect, where we seemingly have a whole group of community or consciousness believing in a false fact. And the explanation for this effect, which is by believers who feel that it to be a real effect, is that what's actually happening is a crossing of the timelines in a sense. And so that's what the Astral Woods hit on. They brought in a different aspect with aliens, which I'm also going to hit on. I did a whole episode on aliens and whether or not we're seeing them properly, and because they may be something completely different than what we expect. We're expecting physical beings as you and I, but I watched a movie which honestly at first I started saying, oh my God, that's so crazy. Like, mugs really believe, even though I do believe in beings that are different than ourselves, light beings, and that to that degree. But when they brought in the multi-dimensional aspect, I started laughing and said, not only do I believe that that's present, I know I've had experience and contact. It's just I was not exactly, I can't even say I wasn't using that terminology, because I actually was. I was using that terminology, and when I wrote it down, I mentioned them only to maybe one friend who was around for me to explain the experience. I mentioned them and called them as I knew them to be the Intergalactic Council. And so it was very wild to then go, oh my gosh, I don't only think that these things exist and they're out there in the world, but I have, and I know I have had contact, and it became very apparent to me when I was in Hawaii and I had an experience where that same kind of thing happened. And it was weird because I was listening to a TED Talks, and as she was speaking, it was weird because I felt like I started to receive a transmission. And it was not, I knew I was, because as I was listening to her words, they were coming in differently. And within there, it was as if there was it was a code to be deciphered within it, but was speaking through me clearly, and I could feel it. And I was going to double check the title. And I looked over at the title to make sure that what I was hearing, because I started to meditate to make sure what I was hearing was what I thought it to be. And so it was very wild. But after that, and going through a little bit more, having maybe watching a movie and them mentioning how the communication is telepathic, it made me really go back and say, oh my gosh, all these experiences were, of course, actually, what people are saying is contact and again, I knew this stuff, but when something becomes apparent again to you, it's just, it's almost insane. And so that's why when they brought up this, the notion that the timelines were converging through the intervening of such people such as a reptilian or the Greys, it was just wild because, one, I've already had extensive research and research and study into these groups and whether or not discerning, whether or not, validity of realness and things like that. But it was just wild because the Mandala effect and their explanation of it happening and the convergence of timelines. Therefore, when we get deja vu, when we have these experiences of feeling like maybe something has happened and maybe we misremembered it, to think that there's a possibility that what we actually are trying to remember is a false memory, as opposed to, what we knew to be real are just facts, and what actually happened is us picking up on the timeline of what is real reality. It's wild to think that that's a possibility, and depending on your experience within life and your experiencing communication with beings beyond ourself, our intelligence, then you will actually have an understanding and will say that it is very possible, and not just very possible, it's happening all the time, and that would explain some things like deja vu and the way that our memory may be misremembered. So it was just an amazing meditation and question to bring up, whether or not things like the Mandala effect are real and the actual cause behind it, whether it is interdimensional beings or not, that these timelines are overlapping and intercrossing, and we are able to perceive them as the brain, as the mind facilitates them into the brain to make sense of this experience. That's fascinating. And if that is happening, I have no doubt at all that there is interference, and not in a bad way or negative connotation, but there is interference and an interworking being utilized by interdimensional beings, multidimensional beings, because I've had these instances, and now I'm talking about this, and even talking about this now will affect a timeline, if not just my timeline, but all those that are linked to. So of course it will change the present, changing my future, and also altering the past in ways that we're not understanding or able to understand the way that we see time. So I just wanted to bring this quick episode and quick idea to your mind so that we can later expand on it and hopefully give you guys something cool to think about, and hopefully, if you've had this experience, give you something to relate to so that you know that you are not the only one out there and alone. It's Waking Wellness. I love you guys. Health is wealth.